everyone, welcome to Quick Hits, another round. Here we go. I'm Sean Peers, your host, President and CEO of Dental Peers, and of course, Quick Hits is brought to you by Dental Peers. And we're bringing back a great guest today, one we've had on this program before who did a fantastic job in the past and is here to do another fantastic bang-up job, and that's Michelle Obey-Simmons from Max Hill. Say hi to everyone again, Michelle.
Hello, everybody.
And yeah, everyone really got it. We got a lot of good feedback with respect to when Michelle was on previously. I think at that point in time, if I remember right, we were talking about all things water lines. And today we're switching gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about IPAC. That it is a four-letter word. I get it. It's a four-letter acronym anyway. So I imagine it probably produces a lot of other four-letter words when people get talking about it. But nonetheless, it is an important topic. It is something that we certainly can't ignore. And we all know it means having an effective IPAC manual. And Michelle is here to answer some questions that some of you are probably thinking in your heads. And she's going to provide a little guidance in terms of how to write an effective IPAC manual. So Michelle, I have to ask, how do you write an effective IPAC manual?
Carefully, creativity as well. I do like your humor on the four-letter word. And as we're writing our IPAC manual, I believe there are a few choice words. So that's what I'm going to help do. I'm going to help gear it so that there's not as many choice words and we are just sticking to IPAC. So I would have to say that the struggles with an IPAC manual is first, who's going to do it? Who's going to be voluntold? Nobody wants to do it, but we all need one, right? And where do you begin? It is quite the task. In some of my professional hats, as many of you I've seen out in the dental world, I work here at Max Hill. I still practice clinically. I teach at Fanshawe College, and I do my own consulting. And for those hats, the topic of IPAC manuals comes up, and everywhere that I work in the clinical sense needs an IPAC manual. So many years ago, I was writing my own IPAC manual. And what triggered it, if you're a dental hygienist in Ontario, would have been if you're called up for your portfolio to submit your portfolio. Back then, there was 4 little checkbox. You have to say if you had an IPAC manual or not. So I could have lied, right? And said, sure, I have a manual. Didn't want to take that chance. So wrote an IPAC manual. It took months and months and months. And then that's when I thought, you know what? We need to help our peers. We need to support each other with an IPAC manual service of some sort, courses. And it's not one that has been done before. So I'm happy to say that Max Hill is leading the way in this topic in not just the courses, but the services as well. And it's a big task because there's a lot that's expected of us. And finding the resources can be tricky because you're trying to balance out, I'm going to say, a lot of legal standards between 2 regulatory bodies that may not always agree, plus public health. And then there's a new contender now to the auditing role, and that's the Ministry of Labor. So now I have to, with my IPAC manual, keep the public safe, keep my workers safe. A lot of work.
Definitely a lot of work. And I mean, I just can't imagine 2 regulatory bodies not being in agreement. I mean, where does that come from?
Maybe you could help us with your legal background, Sean.
Well, you know, we'll sort of combine. You put in the technical mind, I'll throw in a few legal shots in there, and we'll see where we can go. But I mean, I think you're right. It's sort of one of those tasks, probably. You know, you hear that expression, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And getting started with something that seems like such a huge task can often be that biggest challenge, is to just sort of bite the bullet and say, okay, let me just write one section and get started, and I'll concentrate on one section at a time because that gets me going. So when we get past that hurdle, what are some of the other challenges or mistakes that, you know, inevitably it seems that a lot of offices make or run into while they're trying to go through this process of writing their manuals?
Very well said, Sean, and taking the one bite at a time. And you're right, you would begin by, because first we think we're going to write this big entire, I'm going to call it a book. Most of our IPAC manuals are anywhere from 150 to 200 pages. So it's not going to happen overnight, like you said. If we break down the tasks into goals that are achievable, then we're going to be okay. And I would say you start that off with a table of contents. So if I'm going to write an IPAC manual and I think, okay, well, what's going to be in it? Don't worry about the content right away. First, make yourself a table of contents, right? Have all the headings. Where am I going to get that info? Well, I'm going to have a sneak peek at the standards of practice. Some of the documents that are written by public health, they all have a table of contents. I'm going to mirror those. I've already been given what should be in my manual. So not that you're copying, not that you're cheating. If anything, what you're doing is researching. So you're going to steal the table of contents, but adapt it to your own. So obviously, if I'm in an office that does higher risk procedures, let's pretend I'm looking at an oral surgeon's office compared to an ortho office. Big difference in risk. So our manuals are not going to be the same. So I must start tailoring right from the beginning with my table of contents. Tailor it so that it does meet my practice. And then obviously, like you said, take one piece of that at a time. Could you distribute it? I have seen offices that have done that, where different departments in the office have their own specialty. You can share the task. You could, as we said earlier, you could be voluntold to do it, or you could be appointed as the IPAC officer, IPAC representative. So you're right, breaking down the task is wonderful, and it's going to make it happen. And it does come together. I've seen offices do fantastic things as a team, comes together nicely. And then I think in that aspect, you're also going to have less chance for errors, because the person who's doing the task should be the one writing on the task. And as you said, well, what's a common error? Well, a common error is that I start writing in general terms. I start writing in theory. So when we read theory, when we read standards of practice, it all talks about what we should be doing, what we must be doing. But now I'm going to turn that into details. Pretend that nobody knows your office. So pretend that actually you're going to hand this IPAC manual to somebody new for training. If I've never stepped foot in your office, I actually need to know first where the equipment is. So if I'm going to follow an IPAC procedure and make sure I don't contaminate the whole room, I need to know where the disinfectant is, where the glove. I need to know all of that. So sometimes you're right. One of the main mistakes is we lack detail, and then that's not a tailored manual. That's a generic manual, and that would not suit anybody's needs.
And one of the things then that tells you is that you've got to review and update your manual periodically, because maybe you will do an office renovation. Could be pretty small. Maybe you've just bought a new piece of equipment, and so all of a sudden now the process has to change a bit. Maybe you've relocated some of the supplies. So all of a sudden, if we're going to be specific and making sure, as you say, that new employee can come through and read and follow along and understand and find everything that they need to find, you've got to make sure that when you undertake one activity, that you then make sure that you've updated your manual if it's going to have an impact on it.
Exactly. And then by having your manual ready to go, now when new equipment comes in, new protocols, legislation changes, a pandemic happens, then all you're doing is updating sections. And I always look at the pandemic section. We all had one in our IPAC manuals. It was probably, one paragraph. Now it's about 25 pages, but that's a perfect example. And we did it. We updated that information, we put it into our manuals, and how specific. So because we were living it and doing it, we made it very specific. So now think about that as well, and the notion that for the tasks that you're already doing, you can do them with your eyes closed, but I hope you're not in dentistry. But they become so routine that to you and I, we think, oh, of course, well, these are the steps. We write down 4 steps. But like we said earlier, to the person who is not part of that team yet, or would be the reader, needs to have that detailed information if we keep up with it. And back to the manufacturers, like you said, if you buy, I don't know, a new sterilizer, well, we're going to go look in that booklet. We're not going to go put that booklet under the sterilizer. We're going to look at the booklet. We're going to say, okay, well, what are the maintenance tasks? What's the troubleshooting? I'm going to take all that information and I'm going to put it in my manual. May not necessarily have to be repeated. I don't have to copy and paste the whole user guidebook, but I can make reference to it. And then I would be wise to put that user guidebook as an appendix of the manual.
Yeah, it's got to be handy.
Absolutely. And then you're right. In the moment you need it, in the moment you need to troubleshoot, that's always Murphy's Law, is you won't be able to find that information. And I think the appendix piece is interesting, because oftentimes with what I do with Maxil is we'll go into dental offices, they invite us in to do an IPAC audit, And then part of the audit is I will ask to see the written policies and manuals. And they do produce this glorious binder. It's usually a gigantic binder, but what's in it is all the user guidebooks. It's printed standards of practice, which is great, and we do need all those, but that's the appendix of a manual. So another one of the common mistakes is that we think we have a manual, but we have printed resources, which is good. We need a library, but then we have to make it match what we do, right? It has to be tailored. So I guess that would be the procedures part.
100%. And I mean, and that's the step. It's great to have the words on the page. You got to have a way to bring those words to life. So that gets into some of your training, right? I mean, it's great to sit down and say, okay, this is what we do. I read it and I go, especially I'm a new employee these days, maybe, you know, we're finding that we're having to hire a lot of people outside of dentistry that don't have dental experience. They're going to read it. They're probably going to have a lot of questions in terms of what does all this mean and how do I do it?
Exactly. And you make such a good point with some of the labor shortages. We're probably getting more now temps that come into the office and equal frustration. So for the office, usually if you need a temp, it's at the last minute, and then the temp entering does not know your practice. So it could actually not be pleasant. But yeah, now you have written protocols. And that's why I like it when the IPAC manual can still be a nice paper format. Everybody needs to know where the binder is, where the masterpiece is laying, or on every monitor in each operatory, have a digital format. So in the moment that I'm new to your office, everybody's busy and I can't get any help, can I go find this information quickly myself? So yeah, accessibility is huge, right? Or heaven forbids, in the event of an audit. So if an auditor were to come on site, and that could be public health, regulatory bodies, it could be the Ministry of Labor. The Ministry of Labor is usually one that likes to look through that manual because they're worried for the worker safety.
For sure, for sure. And is there a sort of a common sticking point or two, like areas when the people are trying to write their own IPAC manual that a lot of offices tend to get stuck on? Maybe it's more more time consuming to write or research, or do you find it sort of, no, one office, there's no one particular point, this office does really smoothly up to this point, and the next office, that point is okay, but they got stuck on another part? Do you find there's sort of a tendency to hit common sticking points from one office to the next?
Absolutely. And that would be the acronym, the MIFUs, the manufacturer's instructions for use. So in the past, if we had a IPAC manual, and a lot of offices have, and yeah, they might have tailored it, then moved forward to another version, which was more tailored. But we didn't know until 2017, especially in the province of Ontario, and very similar in other geographical areas, that we needed the manufacturer's instructions for use, but not for everything in the office. So I don't need a MIFU for a saliva ejector or bib, because I'm going to throw that out. But I need a MIFU for anything that is reprocessed. So if it's going to go in my sterilizer, I need to have time, temperature, and pressure from the actual manufacturer. What's the role of the manufacturer? Well, the manufacturer, from a legality perspective, has to give you that. So if I buy something from a manufacturer, I need to know how to process it. I need to know how to safely use it on the client and to continue safely using it without obviously ruining it or causing harm to the public. So that's a big piece, because now I would say to everybody, when the boxes come in of orders, whomever opens the boxes now has to do the whole team a favor. They have to keep the little, I'm going to call them trifolds, but sometimes they're like 25 fold, right? You get a pack of burrs and there's this little package inside, you have to open it up. That's where the information lies, but we weren't keeping those, right? So that was part of everything being tossed in the recycling bin. But now we're paying attention to that. So we have to backtrack. So how much product do we have that we're sterilizing, items and instruments we're sterilizing, that we didn't keep the package inserts? But the manufacturer's role is to provide that. In doing that, if we're going to practice what we preach here at Maxilla, we started that mission about, well, it's been about a 4-year project. We have been gathering MIFUs. Where there is no MIFU of a product that we make, we must write you the MIFU. So you can reach out to the manufacturers, and it's not that they may give it to you, they must give it to you. So as a result, we created a whole resource tab on our website and you can go get our MIFUs. So you'll have your library from us, which I think is a big piece, because that's where the struggle will lay. Because we're told by public health and regulatory bodies, if we don't have the MIFU, we can't use it. So now I may also have, I call it an instrument cemetery, that I may have, that drawer that, we all have at home for utensils in the kitchen. Well, we also have that in dentistry, where there's a whole bunch of these wonderful instruments that we don't want to part with because there's still a use for them. But there's a good chance the instrument that I bought for school 30 years ago, I certainly don't have the package insert, and that company doesn't exist. So then we are told we can't use that. So it's a struggle. That's a big piece. You're right. Yeah. What's the biggest hurdle, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm feeling like I need to dub in some horror music or something like that right now. Never mind Stephen King's Pet Cemetery. We've got the instrument cemetery coming at you from a dental office near you.
Exactly. The instrument that has no MIFU, right?
and we know a big aspect, and when that nasty IPAC audit starts coming your way, you've got to have these written manuals. They have to be part of what you can show to make sure that you're compliant.
Exactly. And then I like to filter it as what would shut you down and what would be, I'm going to come back and check up on you. The one that does shut you down is the MIFU. If you have enough of them written, though, however, and you've actually made a very good solid attempt, then of course it's going to be, I'm going to come back. So in the world, I guess, of auditing, attempts are taken into consideration. So you have to have something started. So even if you'd be worried right now that your IPAC manual is maybe a little bit jumbled, you have something, you've started something. So keep working at it so that it gets to that nice tailored finish level. And that's one of the things we've been working hard here at Maxilla is we offer the IPAC 360 service, where you're stuck with me or one of my IPAC teammates for a full day. We will find your instrument cemetery drawer, and we're actually going to go through everything. We look at the instruments, write down the code of each instrument, and then find the MIFU for you. So on our IPAC team here at Maxilla, we have a wonderful individual who has actually built a library of MIFUs from ourselves here at Maxilla and all the other manufacturers. So that's pretty amazing, because that is one person's full-time job here. So I could see how it would get a very daunting task as you're maybe wanting to practice dentistry once in a while, right?
And you've got to squeeze some time in for practicing dentistry, right? I mean, we can't be writing manuals all the time.
Exactly.
So if people, want to reach out to you to be able to take advantage of some of these great resources, have some help either from yourself or a team member putting together their own IPAC manual, or make sure that what they have in place is actually going to be compliant, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
So I have two options. So feel free to email me. My email is michelle@maxilla.com. So MICHELLE. A as in Apple at maxilla.com. And we also developed a new resource tool. You can go onto our website and look at our online courses. It's a complimentary course on how to write an IPAC manual.
And, I know we've just scratched the surface in the short time that we have available here on QuickHits with respect to the importance of making sure that you do have an up-to-date IPAC manual in place. Obviously, the audit is the concern. That's the first thing people, when they hear IPAC, I think the word audit just automatically pops into their head. It's sort of like a natural reflex, if you will. But we had touched upon the importance as well of onboarding and training new team members. The fact that you're going to bring somebody in, it's great to have a good manual. You also have to put it into effect, because not just to show that you're compliant, but you're compliant for a reason. You're compliant to protect your team. You're compliant to protect your patients. You're compliant to protect yourself. So you want to be that ideal employer. Show that you've got the training processes in place by having an IPAC system and manual as part of your onboarding system.
Absolutely. And you're right, the safeguarding, I like that. We're safeguarding in two directions. Obviously the public, but ourselves in our business health. So yes, we don't want interruptions financially, and we don't want, I don't want to call it a silly manual, but we don't want the manual to have been the source of our interruption, where there's ways to be able to tackle it. And the good old saying, if it's not written, it didn't happen. And yeah, so you're going to have to write novels And yes, that's the bottom line of it, isn't it?
100%. So great resources you can find at the Maxil website, as Michelle pointed out, with respect to getting you started down the path of writing an IPAC manual. If it still seems a little bit daunting to be using those resources and then having to do it yourself, you can reach out to Michelle or some of her colleagues, and they'll be there to help out and get things in place for you. So Michelle, thanks so much for joining us for Quick Hits and spreading the good word about what we need to keep in mind when it comes to IPAC manuals these days.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean, for having Maxilla join you. And again, a thank you to dental peers for the wonderful community support that you give all of our dental offices. Have a good day, everybody.
All right, and thank you everyone for joining us. Until next time, we'll see you back here again at Quick Hits.